Like we believe something to be worse than what it might end up being. And we hold on to that, and that becomes that belief system of like, well, I don't design that way, I don't build that way, so I don't need to utilize that tool. But you're missing out on how could it benefit you in other areas. To me, clarity is a myth. You can see current state and you'll see future state, but that area in the middle, like that, I tell people, like, that's the messy middle part of change, and it's the most beautiful part of change. To get to a future state, you have to take on things that you have never seen. You have to provide yourself that time and that grace to go through the unknown.
Ryan, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters podcast. You have a background in construction, and you recognize that there were some challenges within that has led you to doing what you do today. So let's start with your story. What were you doing in the construction field, and what were the things that you noticed to pick up on in that?
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. A little bit of history. I actually started in architecture, or even before that. I started in design drafting and really was kind of focusing on direct digital manufacturing. I worked for a precast plant in Ohio, and then got into architecture and practiced architecture till about 2013.
Okay.
But I really just started noticing, like, hey, we're really struggling with change. And I was hearing these stories on repeat, decades after decades. And since I was born, we've been talking about some of the challenges. So as I grew through architecture and practice and into leadership and running firms and operation, I just really started seeing this area that we want to add all of these things in. We look at a solution, we look at a technology, and we just disconnect the humans from the change. Mm-hmm. And then when I got into, construction and this area where I was more getting into trying to get into projects, business development, I saw a lot of people out in the industry selling, and I had been on that receiving end as an architect. I'd been in those meetings. I was like, well, architects don't purchase anything, so we have to figure this out. Like, this is a major change in the way architects are going to think about building and designing. And then I got into construction, running a general construction building company, and focusing on actual execution of projects from a design build standpoint. I won't get into a lot of that detail. But even when I was in that situation of leading the teams, I was focused on change management. I was coming in with an idea that, maybe they weren't totally sold on right off the bat because they didn't ask for it. They had a prior leader. They were working functionally as a business. And then here comes this guy that's going to drive them in a totally different direction. So it was really like, how do I connect that human to this change, and how am I going to coach them through it?
Right.
So after years of doing that, I saw an opportunity, and it was like, someone's got to focus on change and change management within this industry, and, stop really pretending that all of these solutions are the answer, which some of them will be, but they're not working because we're rushing through the solution. We're pushing something too fast through the business for people to catch up to it and understand, like, hey, how does this impact me as a human? So that's a little bit of the history, kind of how I got into what I'm doing now.
What sort of buildings were you designing as an architect? What sort of buildings were you building when you were running that construction organization?
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky. I've had people tell me you've had like 4 careers in your 25, 30-year experience. But I've my opportunities have really been in healthcare, education, libraries, courthouses, public sector to private, tenant improvements to doing projects all over the country from a construction standpoint. So I've been really lucky to have almost designed in every area because I need that variety as a human. I don't want to be niched into one bucket. It's not how I like to work.
Yeah.
Some people do. Some people are, I want to run this studio. I want to only really focus on healthcare. I want to do this. I wanted to figure out, well, what's the difference, and what can I actually do as an architect and a contractor to design these buildings. So I've done very large mixed use developments all the way down to a tiny tenant improvement project for public sector. So it was just something for me that I wanted to recognize, like, hey, the industry has so many opportunities to improve for not only itself and the designers and the architects that are within it, the contractors, trade laborers, but also for the occupants and the owners. Because of how long, I mean, we all drive around. You see cones on the roads all the time, and you're like, is this work ever going to get done? And things look like they're taking forever. And they do, because it's more complicated than any other manufacturing or assembly lines. But that said, there are opportunities. There are opportunities to explore, but there's been this reluctance, this resistance. So I wanted to see from every perspective what was it that we were resistant on? Like, why were we less willing to adopt certain things and stay in this, like, the known lane?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
like this is tried and true. This is known, so I'm gonna hold on to it, even if situations are different.
So what's the? Do you have some examples of the sort of change that you would have liked to have seen, but maybe was resisted by those around you, or even at kind of an individual level in terms of someone who's working on sites where you recognize that something could be done differently, but actually that's the way they've always done it for the last 30 years. So that's what they're going to do.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much throughout my whole career, I've seen little kind of inklings into it. So when I first started, I was being taught drafting by hand, and I was working in a precast plant. I was doing things by hand. But then AutoCAD came out, and then Revit. So all of these softwares and tools came out. But I would say that the industry has taken, there's a lot of excuse over some of the software of, like, well, we don't need to use that because we don't build this type of building. But they don't realize that you don't have to use, like, let's say Revit to simply model a building. You can use it by utilizing a lot of the power and the strength that it had as a software in order to speed up decision making or eliminate some of the tasks that weren't necessary anymore to put it in the software. But then you fast forward from that was 2000, and that transition was 2006, 9, somewhere in there, from AutoCAD, and AutoCAD was mid 90s. So that's 10 years of change. We're 20 years removed from that. People are still like, I don't see the power in this. And the reality is, like, we could be building this so much differently if we were using a different software, or if we were willing to try it. Because if you resist it and you don't dive into it, then you don't know what you don't know. And you just keep believing in this, like, well, I'm not going to need it because I just always do this. And it's like, well, but you don't know because you've never tried it. Like, I always joke, my mom is afraid of flying. But then I say, she's not afraid of flying. She's afraid of the idea of flying because she's never actually flown. So we tend to get into this idea, like, we believe something to be worse than what it might end up being. And we hold on to that, and that becomes that belief system of, like, well, I don't design that way, I don't build that way, so I don't need to utilize that tool. But you're missing out on how could it benefit you in other areas. So that's one of them, the software. There are delivery models within construction. There are methods of construction within construction that could be tested. but we tend to hold on. Like my belief is this, that we stay in those lanes of the known because there's a little fear of irrelevancy of what we've known and what we've always done. And it's like, yeah, but that's not the power of it.
Yeah.
The known came from an unknown state, and that transition to that was what got you there.
Right.
So how do you do that with the next thing that you try, while also not beating yourself up when you're like, hey, that didn't go as planned? Because there's a huge risk in construction. There's huge challenges within the industry, but we can't solve things that we need to, because we use the risk as an obstacle to not try, to not take that next step.
Because construction projects, even if it's a relatively small piece of work, they can take a couple of years, right? From the initial planning, the designing, getting all the necessary approvals, identifying the contractors, getting the materials, all of these things, that from the moment you kind of had the inkling that we're going to do this project to actually the first ground being broken for it, that can be at least 2 years, if not, and for public buildings, way longer than that, right? So isn't that part of the risk, the reason why there isn't that much appetite for change, because those cycles can be quite long, and because you've got all these approvals and regulators and local authorities and all sorts of other things involved, that it's safer to stick with what you have than to try and change something.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that is an opportunity. Put it in the housing market. We can't build enough housing anywhere in the world right now fast enough and at an affordable level that doesn't get people out of poverty, or house poor. So we utilize it takes this long, and yes, there is a process that we have to go through, but our conventional mindsets of delivery models and how the permitting institutions are going to work, especially in the United States versus Singapore or other areas, like, we're the humans. Like, we can actually change the way we think about design. We can bring other parties in sooner and start asking different questions in order to give them an opportunity to, maybe we don't have to detail something as far as we thought we used to. But what happens now is an owner wants a building, a property manager helps them obtain the building, an architect's brought in, or somebody gives a budget, architect gets through to permit after permit, submittals going in, nothing's buildable off of it. Budget's too high, go back to the drawing boards, and you're resubmitting. You're just in this vicious cycle versus coming up and being like, okay, well, what if we try design build? What if we could, I do that a lot. What if we could be working with jurisdictions or finding a different way in order to get quick permit checks sooner? And there are things that are happening right now. I'm not going to say that they're not. It's just that what used to take 2-3 years, what if we could shrink that down?
Yeah.
What if we could figure out how to get that faster? Because what we're talking about is money. It's someone's money. It's someone's time. It's a lot of energy being utilized to get to that endpoint, which in the end may not be a better product than, by product, I mean a design, right? Not a solution. It's what is it those occupants are going to be living within once the project's complete. So yes, there are a lot of things that have to happen in projects, but we're making a choice sometimes to take the long road. And when there isn't enough, labor for certain things within offices or within the field. And this is one of my things I keep saying is, I don't call it it's not a labor shortage. The labor market's the labor market, and we have to figure out how to design and build around that. That's what we're given. And if we're not going to change our questioning, if we're not going to bring in different parties, if we're not going to think about different processes, tools, methods of construction, or anything to start to make things more efficient or effective and optimize what skill trades we have versus those other solutions, then what is the real problem? The problem isn't all of these solutions. The problem is our willingness to investigate and explore kind of the unknown, something that we've never done before.
So how do you go about helping people understand change, accept change, and be willing to even be open to that initial sort of conversation about change?
Yeah. So I started the business really focused on change management and the operational side. So understanding that human complexity piece. So you have to connect, you have to connect to humans. We have to get executives who want to push a change through to slow down for a moment. We have to not rush it through because you won't get the buy-in. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be individuals within businesses who, you got to have that empathy. Like, hey, I know that you've always known this, but don't you think you're overvaluing that versus what you're capable of learning? Like, if we're transitioning from this manager to that level of executive, like you can't hold on and do everything you were doing before. And saying like, hey, this is what I've known. It got me here. I got to keep using it, or they won't recognize me anymore. Well, you got here because you went through the unknown. You transitioned through things you've never done before. So you again, going back to I've got to connect on that human level. Mm-hmm. And change, getting people to understand when, the idea of choice, control and clarity, and working through that in order to understand like where they get to that area of commitment. Like they're making a choice to become willing or not willing. It could be forced compliance by somebody else, but if they're resisting, that's their choice that they're making. When the reality is that I need to dig in and understand, like, why are you making that choice? Is it about control? Is it about how much clarity you need? And I think, to me, clarity is a myth. You can see current state and you'll see future state, but that area in the middle, like that, I tell people like that's the messy middle part of change. And it's the most beautiful part of change. Yeah. Because that is your growth. That is where you get to explore. And frankly, that's where you get to break stuff, try it again, relearn, have grace on yourself and your team to be like, hey, we're elevating ourselves. This is all about elevating. And it's all about figuring out whether something is going to work and then giving feedback, because you can't just say, hey, well, I tried it once, it doesn't work, so it's no good. Well, the feedback is they have to improve on the other side. So innovation has to improve that way. Like we're not on the first iPhone. Anymore. It came from feedback. It came from years of trying and exploring. And then construction, we're still like back in the old age of flip phones in some cases, because we just are like, nope, it's always worked. Mm-hmm. And I've told them that it doesn't work. And then there's this translation piece that gets lost of how to improve on a solution in order to get to that iPhone 1 and then beyond. Right. So mm-hmm. I think sometimes we expect more out of ourselves than change. And I tell people like, look, it's hard. It is. But, you resisting it doesn't make it be solved. The problem's not solved. Yeah. So if the pain you're having around the challenges that you see is, if you see that as like, hey, I want, that's fine. I'm going to say that it's less pain than the benefit that comes from the future state, then it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for anybody.
I suppose construction is one of those industries where buildings aren't really movable. So the innovations, I don't know, something being built in Europe in a particular way or style is localized because it's built in Europe in that particular way or style. And similarly, something built in the US in that particular way or style is localized because it's in the US. You're not suddenly getting these buildings coming over unless they're sort of prefabricated from different markets, changing the way in which people are constructing. So I can kind of see why people aren't ready to change or don't feel the need to change because it's localized like that. Something you said to me when we were preparing was that we're taught to build habits and routines, but we're not taught to change. So how do you, as part of what you do, help people build habits to change?
Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite sayings is like, why are we constantly being like, hey, you want to be able to take that next step of change, so you build a habit. You've got to do something every day, 20 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, right, to get to that point. If you want to get to the gym, they say the gym takes 30 days, 90 days, whatever, to
Yeah.
get your mindset towards that. And what I'm trying to get everybody to understand is like, it's not permanent. Like we teach as if there's permanence to everything. And what I want everyone to understand is situations will always change. So as there's right leaders for right times based off the situation we're in. And sometimes there's wrong leaders, right? And sometimes there's wrong decisions in situations. So it's getting them to, I want everyone to be more curious. So it's asking deeper questions around, this habit that they've had for a long time, or this thing that they've known for a long time to always be true, suddenly is no longer true, but they
Mm.
hold on to it because it's a habit. It's a boomerang effect. Like, hey, I've always built it this way. I've always designed it this way. I've always, looked at it in this way or whatever. You have to say, like, when did I learn this? Who taught me this? And what were situations like then versus now? Or even questions like, what would have to be true for this to no longer be valid?
Yeah.
And maybe that question, you now saying like, well, that's already happening. So I have to go back to my ability to learn and to strengthen through habits this next thing that's coming at me, in order to get there. We don't, let's say routines, like when your routine gets off in the morning, if you overslept, or you got to suddenly go somewhere instead of going to the gym, or you got to do this and that, your whole day's thrown. People say it all the time, like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm off today. Like my morning routine is off. That's just how we are as humans. It's how our minds work, our bodies, everything about us. So when it comes to, you have these things that you've always known, you've always learned, processes and everything else, the reality comes to addressing that change is being willing to, one, question it, and two, don't feel embarrassed when it no longer works.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine. Like it worked because those situations allowed it to work. But so conventional construction, everything that we were doing before with the labor force that we had before, all of that worked well. But now we can't get through projects fast enough. Every schedule is delayed. Every project goes over budget. Every parts of the industry is shrinking. So we can't do what we did there because situations are different. And now we have to look at different tools. And it's okay. Like, it's okay that we still believe in what got us here. But we have to go back to where we were before and just really start asking questions.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. And as you were talking, I was kind of just thinking about the way in which there's so many aspects in life where a particular habit might have served us because of the circumstances we were in at that time, or a particular thought, or a particular set of beliefs. But now, times are different. Something that you believed in 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because of so many constructs around it, the environment you're in, maybe is no longer true today, right? And that's the same kind of principle here. So now that you're in this cycle of bringing change about and helping people to change, what does success mean to you now, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I love the question because, I'm in this area that I believe in transformation. I think transaction comes from transformation. So success to me, from a personal standpoint, I had like two buckets.
Okay.
One, that I was willing to try things knowing that I could fail. And getting a team and getting individuals to also do that. That, like, you don't have to stay in the transaction. That if you want to grow, your success is going to come by giving everything its fair shake. And not every solution is a good solution. I'm not saying you've got to try everything. But I'm saying, like, success to me is that it doesn't have to be perfect. But it can't live in the zone of obstacle after obstacle. I don't have time. I don't have the money. I don't have this. I don't have that. Whatever it is, right? It's that, I know I could fail. But if I don't do this, what will I miss?
Yeah.
So to me, it's success is that you walk away willing to give things its try. Mm-hmm. That you believe can help you. And even if it doesn't get you to that end goal, that you still looked at it as a learning experience. You still took it, and it still probably provided you more than you can even imagine when you go to the next thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. Success is built on trying, and if you don't try, you don't know. And as you say, even if it feels like a failure at the time, it's never a failure. It's feedback, right? It's you learn something from it. You got something from it. As you know, I have a tradition on my podcast of asking a previous guest for a question from my next guest, and I think this ties in very well, actually, with what you were just saying. So my previous guest asked, what is one failure in your career or life that propelled you to bigger success? So it seemed like a failure at the time, but actually now it's propelled you to bigger success.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's probably even more recent than some of the past things. But
okay,
there was a moment where trying to run a construction company for, a group of people that, that wasn't their first language, right? Meaning, like, construction is not what they came from. Yeah. And we were building a construction business, and we were able to complete a project during the pandemic that, the company had never done before. Not just the one I was running and founded, but the whole corporation had never done anything like this. And we didn't hit, the net profit that you would love to hit, but there was profit. Right. And it got done. And, internally, I personally don't believe it's a failure. I believe there were failures at some of the steps. Mm-hmm. In some other areas, but those failures taught us how to get better and to build stronger processes for the next thing. But when I think about that business and where I got it to a certain point, sometimes I wish that I could have taken it further. Mm-hmm. But if I don't go through some of those things, I don't recognize how bad we are sometimes implementing change management in large corporations, or how bad we are sometimes to accept change as humans. And a lot of those things that I witnessed and saw gave me this idea of what to do with the business. That started with, putting thoughts down into a book about getting, people to build stronger relationships with change and building out a framework in order to do that. And in order to, get into coaching, go through the coaching, understand like, hey, this is a mindset. It is studying the brain, studying neuroscience, studying about how we think, and reading up, and it actually released my curiosity even more of like, well, I got to know this. Like, I got to understand why we struggle with it.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we allow squatters to live in our brains and our minds, take up very valuable real estate and then question ourselves and not question that. Like, that's where it started to bring all these things into me, as I went through this time, to say like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is my
Right.
purpose. This is what it was always meant to get to.
Okay. So on paper, maybe not on paper, you had set an expectation as to what that project would deliver. It didn't deliver that, so therefore that felt like a failure. But in the process, you learned all these things that have now enabled you to start your business, right? And start to create a book. So that's really interesting, actually.
Yeah, it reminds. I mean, I love Amy Edmondson's books. The Right Kind of Wrong, and all those books that she's written, and how she teaches and things. And that's it. Is like treating it like a laboratory. Like, if everything is about being successful, that every project goes exactly as planned, even if it's the first time you tried something, then that's a failure in itself. Because reality is like, to get to a future state, you have to take on things that you have never seen. You have to provide yourself that time and that grace to go through the unknown.
Yeah.
And to relish in it. Like, just be like, oh, I want to learn it all. I want to understand everything. And realize like, it's on a rocket ship to the top through this piece, that it's take a step, figure out what you learn, take another step, feedback, talk to the next groups. And that's how we're going to get somewhere in the industry.
It's interesting that, when we're children, especially young children, we understand that, like learning to walk as an example, we try it, we fall down, we try it, we fall down, we try it, and eventually we learn to walk. And as adults, we lose that, right? We lose that kind of, let's try it and see what happens. And yes, we might fall down in it, but we're going to try again, and we're going to, do this. It's kind of interesting, like how we change as people, as we go from that child who was happy to try anything to an adult who's maybe not happy to try to change whatever. And just has a regular routine, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, it is. We're always constantly changing. And I think we get to that safe zone, right? We get to that point where, as our clock is ticking, like we get to point, like, I know I stare at it. I get older, and I'm recognizing like, time is precious.
Yeah.
Because you don't know. And when you're a kid, there's that freedom of like, forever. Like, I get to ask any question. I get to be as annoying and curious as possible. And I think that's what we speed through youth. We want to fast forward through everything.
Yeah.
And we got to be more curious as adults. Like, we get into our tunnel vision. We get into we stick in our lane. We hold on to things that no longer have any value anymore. We don't question enough. We don't ask enough questions.
There you go. And on that point, Ryan, do you have a question for my next guest?
Yeah, this is a fun part. So I think for the next guest, I would ask, is there a belief that you have had that you have this inkling that you no longer are sure why you have it, or where you even got it from, and what is it?
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, there's probably loads of beliefs of that nature that I've had in the from before that I've sort of stopped and thought, where did that belief actually come from and why? Yeah. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head for myself. Do you have one that kind of springs to your mind from your
Yeah.
past?
I'll pick on food, because
Okay.
food's an easy one, right? Like, as a kid, and I'm going to pick on a vegetable or root vegetable that a lot of people don't like, but I'm going to say, um, beets.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I thought beets came from a can. And
Right.
that's a song, right? Peaches from a can. But like beets I saw it, how it came out. I was like, that's disgusting. I will never eat a beet. And then I got older and I'm like, man, there's no way. I don't like beets. I don't like beets.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, I tried it in a salad somewhere and I can't remember. I think it was in Chicago and somebody ordered it. And I was like, oh, it's going to be gross. And then I was like, wait, that's what that is? Like, so, I think a lot of times we have a perception of something. We see it, we think of it. Because as a child of the 80s, man, we saw a lot. Like, there's some weird stuff. Like, we tried a lot of things in the 80s. But I think sometimes, like, we hold on to those. Like I said, I wouldn't have known that I liked it. And now, I won't go back to the can. But I was like, oh, it's not that I didn't like beets. I didn't like the idea of it, and I didn't like that version of it. But there are other versions of it. And I think why I've picked on food is that there are other things in life that are the same way. That we can think like, well, that didn't work, and I didn't like that. So everything, even encompassing that area, it's got to be true for that too.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be the case.
That's such a great analogy, actually, when you say that, because we can all relate to food, right? There's always been something as a kid that you saw or tasted or didn't like. But the reality is, it, as you say, beets from a can versus beets that were dug up out of the ground and fresh and delivered to you freshly. There's a difference in that. But just associating that, okay, well, maybe all root vegetables I don't like because that's, you've associated with that one beet experience. But actually, there's so much. And we do that with people. We do that with so many things, right? We'll tag someone as saying, oh, I don't like that type of person or that type of character. And then everyone gets brushed with the same brush.
Yep.
And we're all individuals. We're all different.
It's like a teacher who is having a kid and tried to choose a name. Because my ex-wife was a teacher trying to choose names. Like, there were names you could not use because they were associated with somebody. And I think that you're right. That's how we do it. We have an association, but we need to ask that question of why is that even valid right now?
Yeah, exactly. Why is it even valid? And that's what we've got to be going through life, right? Thinking about all these assumptions we've made all along the way, and does it still serve us? Is it still valid? So we're at the top of our time now, Ryan. Thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters. This has been a great conversation. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, the work that you do, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think via the website, which is just connectiveconsultinggroup.com, or via LinkedIn. That's my primary area. You can find me at Ryan K. Ware on LinkedIn, which I should have a link in here. That's one of the easiest ways to kind of get a hold of me, whether it's for speaking, consulting, or coaching. We didn't really get into all that aspect, but that's because the conversation is more strength for listeners. So that's it. Reach out any of those ways. Are aware at connectiveconsultinggroup.com as well.
Okay, great. We'll be sure to add that into the description of the podcast and also add it into the actual recording itself. So thank you, Ryan, once again for taking part in Success Matters.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun and some great questions.
To find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.